us on this webinar. Tonight's topic is navigating the emotional turmoil caused by war trauma and intergenerational trauma. And tonight we have two presenters that will be sharing information about trauma. Our first presenter is Dr. Valentina Ogarian, and she works as a pediatric neuropsychologist, and she's an associate professor of psychiatry and biobehavioral sciences at UCLA. Our second presenter this evening is Taline Babikian. Dr. Babikian is a clinical psychologist and clinical director at the UCLA Sims Mann Center for Integrative Oncology. So this evening's presentation will be for about an hour. We'll have Dr. Babikian and Dr. Ogarian do a short presentation, and then if you have questions, you can place your questions in the Q&A. So please place your questions in the Q&A, and then Dr. Anders would go ahead and moderate the questions and then share the questions with Dr. Babikian and Dr. Ogarian. And with that, I'll turn it over to our two doctors.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you and to speak with families of our community's school districts. Just as a clarification, I switched our names. So the description you gave of Dr. Ogarian was actually mine and vice versa. It makes no difference, but just in case anyone's confused, and I'm going to go first. There's no need to harbor and state how challenging and devastating the last several days and weeks have been for various members of our community. And the purpose of this webinar and this discussion is to really focus on how to help our students, our young students, our middle schoolers, our high school students manage this difficult time as we, the adults that they rely on, are also feeling overwhelmed and challenged ourselves. So that'll be the purpose of this brief talk and discussion. Before we get into some practical tools and recommendations, we thought it'd be important to take a few minutes and talk about stress, trauma, and intergenerational trauma on our nervous system, on the way we process information, on the way our body digests challenging situations. The word stress is a very colloquial word. We use that all the time. We say we're stressed because there was a lot of traffic or because we have a deadline coming up. And without question, stress is a normal part of day-to-day life. Our bodies, our physiologies, including the physiology of our young students, is designed to tolerate some level of stress.
Dr. Babikian, could you slow down just a little bit for our translators, please?
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Just to put it in context, when there is an overwhelming situation that is anxiety-provoking, our nervous system stops doing everything else it's supposed to be doing. So if we're talking about young children, learning stops, resting stops, digestion stops, so that we can address the stressful scenario. And when that stressful scenario is handled, then we go back to our baseline of socializing, of eating, enjoying, digesting, and learning. So that's the overarching experience, and our body is used to flowing in and out of this state. Trauma, on the other hand, is slightly different. In traumatic experiences, the perception is that one's well-being or someone's life is in danger. This could be a single event like a major earthquake, a car accident, or an untimely death of a family member. It could also be a chronic experience. So traumatic experiences that are chronic can be repeated exposure to abuse, whether it's physical, psychological, emotional, and in the context of what we're talking about, would be extended periods of feeling this state of stress, this state of being in a fight or flight response. Many of you may have heard that term, fight or flight. And again, that designates our body's ability to stop responding to anything that's not critical to our survival. So if you imagine a somewhat silly example, but helps illustrate the point, is 10,000 years ago, if we're walking in the woods and we notice that we're being chased by a lion, all of the responses that would kick into gear our nervous system to protect us would be to stop doing anything pleasurable and respond to the stressor, be able to run fast, to be able to climb fast and do things that we normally wouldn't be able to do. But then once that stressor goes away, to be able to engage in other activities. Currently, thankfully, no one's being chased by a lion, but there are metaphorical lions, and our nervous system's response to that kind of stressor where we feel like our life and well-being is in danger is the same as it would have been many, many centuries ago. What's also important is this concept of intergenerational trauma, where the idea is that experiences that have been traumatic for our ancestors can have consequences on later generations, sometimes 2 or 3 generations following a traumatic experience. We see that individuals may have a heightened sense of vulnerability. They may have many fear-based reactions, which may look like aggression or violence. And beneath all of those acting out behaviors is a great deal of fear. There may be a sense of helplessness or hopelessness that's, again, passed from generation to generation. There may be feelings of depression and a lack of ability to engage socially or to engage academically. So it's important to recognize that these experiences that really make an imprint on our nervous system not only affect our current functioning, but also impact generations to come, which is why it's so important to have these discussions to equip ourselves and to equip our youngsters so that we combat and stop this passing on of these not so healthy coping skills and reactions from generation to generation. To put this stress concept in a little more perspective, there's stress, and our response to it is an important part of life. In fact, without having stressful situations, our nervous systems don't grow. Young people can have the opportunity to expand their coping skills, to learn effective ways of dealing with challenging situations, to learn how to think about their emotions, and without having practice opportunities to deal with challenging situations, there is no opportunity for growth. So there's healthy stress, positive stress, like preparing for an exam or preparing for a wedding, or whatever other experiences we would put in that bucket. There is this middle ground of stress. And I think as a community, many of us are in this middle ground, and some of us may be over into the toxic level. However, this middle ground is tolerable stress where there is a strain on the nervous system, but what helps buffer some of that is to have the again, coping skills, coping tools to be able to deal with a challenging situation. And we're going to talk about what some of that may look like on a more practical level, as opposed to toxic stress, which is the extreme end, which could be, again, repeated exposure to narratives, to trauma histories, to current traumatic experiences, if families and their loved ones are actively involved in violence or war and anything else that comes with that. Earlier, I talked about the fight-flight response, which is a very healthy way to deal with a perceived stressful or traumatic, threatening situation. What can happen, and this is important to recognize in young people especially, is if we're not able to deal with constant, repetitive, stressful situations, when that fight or flight response just isn't working, it's not helping us move beyond this perception that our life and well-being is in danger, we can fall into a place of freezing. And freezing in children may look, again, like disengaging. Sometimes clinically, kids can be diagnosed with things like ADHD because they're distractible, they're not connecting. It could be depression, a depressive type of presentation. It could be exacerbation of anxiety. So if kids have a vulnerability to, for example, an eating disorder, when they're under chronic stress, we may see those challenges become even more prevalent. If they're obsessive compulsive in nature, then that may irritate those behaviors where we'll see more of those. Depression, again, is another one where we may find kids disengaged and not connecting with their environment. Why all this is important, I mentioned a lot of emotional consequences and perhaps some cognitive consequences in terms of learning and being able to engage. But stress in the body, especially if it's chronic, and especially if the physiology is not able to keep up with the constant stimulation, not only impacts our brain and our nervous system in terms of all the things I've already mentioned, but it's got a significant impact on all of our systems. We can have people have GI issues. We can have aches and pains and chronic pain symptoms. We can have kids with asthma and other allergy sensitivities be more prone to a response or a reaction. The immune system is a major one where our vulnerability to viruses and bacteria is, the threshold is lowered, so we're more prone to infections. And the list goes on and on. The more studies looking at chronic stress in the body, the more we realize that the impact of our emotional experiences have a long-lasting and a large impact on many of our systems, all of which are intricately related to each other. So what I wanted to do now, before turning it over to Dr. Ogarian to talk to you a little bit about how to navigate some of this with our children, is to take a step back from what we're here to talk about, which is the impact of war and our community's ability to navigate that with our children. When I look at the literature and look at not only mental health, but well-being in general, I intentionally use the word well-being and not mental health, because the distinction between mental and physical health is somewhat arbitrary. We're talking about one system. And all these things are intricately connected, as I mentioned before. So if we look at all of the factors that would help provide a buffer or resilience to young people's well-being, there's a number of them. Several of them are listed here. Kids who are active in their culture, kids who are active in their religious organization or other community function tend to do better. Kids who excel in school and or their sports or whatever extracurricular activity is of their choice do better. Kids who have one important one, at least a connection with at least one adult. And I'm going to highlight this one out of all of the ones listed here, because many studies show that regardless of what we are measuring, whether it's mental health or risky sexual behaviors or risky substance use behaviors, poor academic outcomes, or you name it, recovery from a major medical illness, kids who can identify at least one adult in their life who they believe cares about them tend to be at lower risk. And interestingly, it makes no difference who that person is. Many times it's a biological parent, but other times it could be a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, a religious coach in the family, an athletic coach, a teacher, etc. So we'll come back to this piece, but that tends to be a really important factor in terms of building buffer and building a resilience when kids are dealt with a challenge. On the other hand, there are several predictors of poor well-being, and none of those are going to surprise you. And some of them, I think, are on the table in the context of what we're discussing tonight in terms of war and uncertainty and fear. So if kids feel rejection, if kids feel anxiety, if their academics are falling off, if there's any kind of exposure to family trauma or other traumatic experiences, all of these predict poor well-being. So if I were to take all of these factors, many of which didn't make into this cloud, and build two pillars, I would call one of them safety and agency, and the other one purpose, connection, and belonging. So regardless of what context we're discussing the well-being of young people, and tonight we're doing that in the context of everything that's happening around our world and in our communities. These are the two pillars that we as parents or educators are trying to strengthen. The first one, safety and agency, I'll break down into the components. So safety is, regardless of what may be happening that may be scary in the world, it's important for kids, young and old, to feel that their well-being is not in jeopardy, that they have adults and other people in their life who can maintain their protection, that their well-being isn't in any kind of danger. The agency part of it is to give kids the feeling that they have some level of control over what's happening, even if they are completely unable to control the environment, having some sense of control over something small that's important to them. So whether that's the ability to participate in a fundraising activity, to be able to engage in any kind of community work that's meaningful to them. All of those things help build agency. I think the safety part is also not only physical safety, but emotional safety, is the ability to be able to speak their mind, to have a safe person or space to discuss issues that are on their mind, to feel like, again, that at least one other adult in their life is interested in their perspective, in their experience, and is giving them the time and the space to be able to articulate whatever it is that's on their mind. So that's the safety and agency pillar. The other pillar that sums up the rest of whatever's in that cloud is the importance of purpose, connection, and belonging. And so much of this is at stake now with all of the dividing issues that come up with that naturally arise in the context of war. So making sure that kids' perception of their belonging to whatever it is that's important to them, that they're seen, that they are, their perspective is important and they're listened to, and that's protected. Those are all important to address. So with these two pillars in mind, I'm going to now transition and ask Dr. Ogarian to put these concepts into a practical set of recommendations, so that we can start talking about what this may look like in our young children.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Babikian. Keeping the context of those two pillars in mind of safety, agency, connection, and purpose, it's important and helpful for parents to recognize that as you all might be navigating heightened stress as a result of all the atrocities that are going on in different parts of the world, stress may also impact children. As children recognize heightened stress in their parents and how they're navigating their own stress, you may notice changes in your child or children's mood, irritability levels, changes in the way that they actively do their homework or their school performance, changes in the way that they're connecting or socializing with their peers. You may also notice increased aggression or behavioral changes. Next slide, please. We will talk about how, in general, children, as they experience stress, there can be intensified feelings. As Dr. Babikian mentioned earlier, some of these feelings could be related to fear, to anxiety, to worry, uncertainty. You may notice some affect changes, so increased tearfulness with children, mood changes, or oftentimes parents might describe it as mood swings that they notice, especially with older children. Irritability, as we mentioned, regression. So noticing that if your child had outgrown an unhelpful behavior, they might be regressing to that behavior as a result of the increased stress that they're noticing in the home with their parents. I will go through each kind of developmental age group of how parents might notice different signs of stress in their children. It's important to note that very young children are like sponges, and so they're completely impacted by their parents' reaction to stress or how their parents be responding to stress. And then older children, adolescents, they have multiple factors related to their stress. So they might be having discussions in the classroom, or they might be having conversations with their peers and are also impacted by how their parents are navigating stress. So to break down each category, with preschool children, parents might notice that their children feel fearful of being separated from one or both of the parents, and this might have been a behavior that could have been different prior to this heightened stress. They might notice sleep pattern changes, so noticing that children are having a harder time falling asleep, staying asleep. Oftentimes we'll hear children talk about scary dreams or having a bad dream or a nightmare and wanting to be with the parent, and increased tearfulness. With the elementary school children, they're a little bit older, so we might not see those impacts like we do with preschool children, but we might see them having a harder time focusing, having a harder time concentrating on their schoolwork. We might hear or observe increased anxiety or fear with them. And then with high school children, it is a little bit different. High school children might express some vague physical complaints, or they might be more somatic in nature. Stomach aches, stomach cramps, headaches. As Dr. Babikian was discussing earlier, stress impacts the whole body, and similarly with teenagers as well. Parents might notice that high school age children are withdrawing. Maybe it's withdrawing from their usual activities or even from their peers. They might notice behaviors that are disruptive, so aggression or anger. And a lot of these symptoms are as a result of fear-based emotions that they might have a difficult time expressing or directly communicating to their parents. And also, parents might notice maladaptive coping. This is where they might lean into substances or unhelpful ways of coping as a way of numbing or dealing with the various challenging feelings that they're experiencing, and also to be mindful of lashing out behaviors or having challenging encounters both with their peers, but also other members of their family or their home family. So with all of that said, what can parents do to support children of all ages? And I think it's the next slide. The first, we thought about different themes. So communication, hope, and community. And if we have a visual of the pillars of well-being, we can imagine where these would go in terms of the pillars. The first one I'd like to focus on is communication. So as parents, one of the most helpful ways to help a child is to help them feel included through communication. You know, with younger children, we want age-appropriate language. With high school children, we might use a little bit of different kind of language or more descriptive to talk about the current events that are happening in different parts of the world. Inclusion with children means talking with children, inviting them into dialogue. Sometimes parents will share that they feel overwhelmed or they feel stressed about not having answers to their child's questions, and that's okay. It's being able to acknowledge not really having answers to all questions. And it's really important and helpful to acknowledge when there are difficult feelings and feelings that maybe there are no specific solutions to, but they are what they are. One thing that I like to include here is that it's really important if the child or children notice that the parent is having a difficult time with anything that's related to these past few weeks. And for example, the parents have an argument about anything, or the parent watches something on television and is really struck by it, and the child notices that the parent is upset, visibly upset. Their eyes are red, and the child asks the parent, were you crying or are you crying? And the parent says no. This would create dissonance because it does not match the perception of what the child is observing. And what's harmful, potentially harmful or unhelpful about this is that what it does, it tells the child to not trust their intuition, and it tells them to not trust their emotional judgment. So we want to empower children to be able to trust their judgment. So modeling appropriately emotional affect gives the child the permission to do the same with the parent in return. The second theme that we focused on was hope, and this is similar to Dr. Babikian's pillar of connection and purpose. So children, young adults, adolescents feel helpless as a result of everything that's going on in the world. They want to feel more helpful, and perhaps they're uncertain as to how. It can be helpful for the parent to encourage children to engage in these types of protests or rallies, to be able to write letters to their congressmen or to their leaders about things that they're passionate about, to join fundraisers and to be able to give back to the communities that they're passionate about or the communities that they self-identify with. So what this does is it helps create meaning and it helps foster purpose and connection. Additionally, it's helpful if children belong or as a family unit to any type of faith, spirituality, religious belief system, or value system. It can also help children feel hopeful about the future. And the last one is community. So it's very similar to the agency piece Dr. Babigan was referring to, but it's really about parents helping ways for children to feel that they have agency and deciding how they'd like to be active in their communities and how they'd like to be active in the ways that they're involved in their communities. Something that's also important here to mention is with the communication piece, just to go back to that for one quick second, it's really important to also limit mass social media with children. So managing appropriate access to images and videos and programming. Next slide, please. And some additional tips just to think about as parents as you support your children. Reassurance is extremely important and helpful for younger children, especially physical reassurance. Spending time cuddling or being together can be immensely helpful to the child. Verbal reassurance, as Dr. Babigan was saying earlier, what does safety mean and look like to you and to the dynamic with your child? Being able to highlight facts of what we know now, currently, today they are safe, today they have a safe home, they're in a safe place. Attempting to maintain a normal routine as much as possible, even though there is so much information and stimulation that comes in from all sorts of places. It might be helpful for the parent to shift the expectation of the child's either school performance or home-related tasks temporarily, at least. And then, as I said earlier, to really monitor or limit the use of social media and television, especially ones that include really graphic images of some pretty horrific events that have been taking place. And then next slide, please. So this slide, I think, is relevant for all people. We really want to focus and encourage parents to take care of themselves and to really be intentional about the way that they're coping with the stress of the world. Self-care really is unique to you. It is not going to be a one-size-fits-all model. I like to think about self-care and coping through the lens of a biopsychosocial model, which means how are we taking care of our body? How are we taking care of our spirit? So for example, some helpful ideas for coping and self-care could be related to physical activity, even something as simple as taking a walk and including your child in that can be really helpful. Making sure that you're getting enough sleep, making sure that you're engaging in well-balanced meals or that nutrition remains something that you're mindful of. And then, as Dr. Babigan mentioned too, connection. So that social connection, you have meaningful relationships, any sense of spirituality or faith-based activity or identity, and then anything that brings meaning into your life with other types of interests. And that's it on the self-care and coping. I think Dr. Babigan, the last slide is you.
Yeah, I think just a reminder that earlier we talked about trauma as an intergenerational concept, but so is healing. And so our kids, regardless of age, are sponges to how we model dealing with stressful situations, the language we use, whether or not we're compassionate in our discussions versus using language that may be stereotyping or stigmatizing and polarizing. It's an opportunity to change the way the next generation thinks about humanity and their level of compassion with others. So with that, we've put a slide together for resources. Obviously, the school system has counselors and programs that can be accessed if a student is having a particularly hard time. If the family has a trusted therapist, teacher, or outside coach, that may be another resource for families to lean into. And then there are several one-pagers, which I'll briefly introduce to you from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. And why don't I pause and share you what those have? Many of them are very similar to what we've discussed, but they're 1 or 2 page summaries of things to think about as parents or teachers that you can review just to solidify some of the concepts and issues that we've introduced to you today, or share with other parents or your partners, parenting partners. The first one is about talking to children about war, taking a stock of how we feel about things and how the events have impacted us, how to start the conversation, to not assume that our children think or feel the way we think they do. They may have made a completely different meaning than we have ascribed to whatever we're hearing on the news. Giving them an opportunity to tell us what they know and how they've interpreted the information so that we can clear up any misunderstandings, provide context, and monitor adult conversations. I'm preaching to the choir, as many of you are parents. You know that even very, very young children may look like they're busy doing something else, or our teenagers may have their earbuds and look like they're busy playing a game or listening to music, but they're very much attuned to the adults in their life. And the discussions we have and the meanings we make go a great distance with influencing them, especially for our teenagers, for whom there are lots of conflicting sources of information, including their peers, and a little bit about the media. The second sheet is assisting parents in coping with collective traumas. And again, many of these concepts we've touched on, but it's nice to have all of this in one place. A series of things to consider. Many of them, again, we've touched on already. But if you wanted to review this, if you wanted to share this with other members of your family or other adults who your children interact with, this is a great resource. And lastly, there's a young child specific page that highlights some issues that are particularly relevant to younger children in terms of how to make them feel safe, how to allow them to express feelings. Younger children may not be able to tell you that they're scared or they're confused, but they may be able to draw, for example, or show you through play. And having an extra resource kit for their developmental age is really important. Following their lead, again, this is relevant for all age groups, but it looks slightly different when we talk about younger children versus older children. Giving them an opportunity to tell a story, which may not be in a narrative like I'm doing now, and might take different forms depending on how they process their environment, and a series of other ones. So all of these resources will be made available to you as PDFs and links. So why don't I stop there? That's all we had, but we're happy to take any questions or elaborate on anything that might be helpful for the group.
So we have a question that just came in the Q&A. So if anybody else has questions, please place them in there. The question would be, what would you recommend we tell our kids about what is going on if they are not aware? My kids are 5, so they likely don't know, but they are likely seeing how sad, stressed I am, even if I try to hide it.
Great question. I think we don't need to, especially for 5-year-olds, worry them beyond what they know. So if if your 5-year-old has no idea what's going on in the world, but they see you stressed, perhaps just telling them that you're overwhelmed or you're not feeling 100%, or you're tired, or you're worried, without giving them a lot of detail, assuming they know nothing. There is a possibility that they know something, in terms of what they hear on the news or discussions in the school environment. So perhaps creating a space first to see what they might know, whether it's correct or a misunderstanding or some partial knowledge, that will give you a little more to work with if you want to share a little bit of how you're feeling. But if they have absolutely no idea, and you just want to address that you're stressed or overwhelmed, and that's why you're going to take a walk, or that's why you're going to listen to music, or that's why you need an extra hug, that's going to be helpful. Showing them you love them, cuddling with them, touch, all of that will help not only you and your nervous system, but your child's nervous system as well, even if they don't have the context for why you're feeling the way you're feeling.
Great, and we'd like to open it up to any other questions of our panelists. You can place those in the Q&A. We'll give it a little minute. I just wanted to share the links to the documents that were shared earlier are in the chat as well, so please grab those as resources. And also remind everyone that we are recording this webinar, and we will be sharing that, posting it out this week. But give it a few more minutes just for any other questions. And while we wait, I don't know if either of our panelists had anything else to share or any other thoughts that you wanted to bring out to the audience tonight.
I think we appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all, and hope that you found some valuable insights, and can translate this into your relationships with your children and your family.
Thank you so much. Dr. Knapik, any closing thoughts from you?
I'm very, very impressed and very appreciative of Dr. Babikian and Dr. Ogarian sharing the research, sharing their experiences, sharing their insight about trauma, because all of us experience trauma in our daily lives. And all of us are impacted by the traumas around the world in different ways, and we handle them in different ways. And so together, we share our feelings with each other, we share our observations with each other, and then we have age-appropriate conversations with our children and with our students at our schools. And so we're very cautious and thoughtful about what we do. And so I just wanted to share that, just to kind of reinforce the message that we're sending and sharing with everyone, and just kind of reinforcing many of the thoughts that our families and parent partners have in our community.
I also wanted to thank, I was looking at the attendees during tonight's event, all the Burbank staff that have attended tonight to gather insight on how to support your students and families in your classrooms. So I really appreciate all of our BUSD staff for attending tonight. Again, we will share this recording. I also thank our panelists tonight. Thanks Dr. Knapik for setting this up and organizing this evening's webinar. Seeing that there's no other questions in the Q&A, we're gonna end the webinar for this evening. Appreciate
Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Thank you so much.